My friend pretended to be my financial advisor and stole everything. It took me a long time to admit that the first sentence was true, even to myself. When you know someone from kindergarten, when you were the best man at his wedding, and he at yours, you just don't allow your brain to process the possibility that he's capable of absolute, calculated ruin. But Mark was, and he did. The beginning of the end was also the beginning of my great success. I was 32, and the small software company I'd co-founded was acquired. The money was a life changer, enough to make me truly comfortable, maybe for life, if I played it smart. I was sitting in my living room, staring at the number on the closing documents, feeling dizzy, when Mark called. Alex, my guy, I heard the news. Congratulations, you've hit the jackpot. Mark's voice was always a little too loud, a little too enthusiastic, like a radio DJ. He had worked in finance for years, or at least, that's what he told everyone. He dressed the part, expensive suits, slicked back hair, and a watch that probably cost more than my first car. I told him I was drowning in paperwork and didn't know the first thing about managing a portfolio that big. I'm thinking of talking to a wealth manager, I admitted. A wealth manager? Alex, come on. Who are you going to trust more than me? He demanded, his voice dropping into a sincere, confidential tone. I'm family. These big firms will charge you an arm and a leg, put you in their standard cookie-cutter junk, and treat you like a number. I know you. I know Sarah. I know what you need. He came over that night. He brought an expensive bottle of whiskey and a leather-bound folio. My fiancée, Sarah, was immediately skeptical. He's family, sure, but is he certified, Alex? Does his firm specialize in managing liquid assets of this size? She asked me quietly in the kitchen as I grabbed glasses. Of course, he is, Sarah, I whispered back, already annoyed. He wouldn't pitch this if he wasn't legit. Look at him, he's practically a banker. Mark laid out a plan on the dining table. It wasn't a document from a major firm, it was a sleek, personalized presentation with graphs and projections promising exponential growth. We're not talking safe government bonds, Alex, he said, leaning in. We're talking strategic, high-yield private placements. We'll double this in 5 years, safely. It's all in a separate holding trust for privacy and tax benefits. I remember staring at the part where he needed full signatory authority on a newly created trust account. It felt wrong, but Mark saw my hesitation. Alex, I need to be able to move fast. If a private placement opportunity opens up, I have literally hours to execute the transaction before the window closes. I need instant access. It's a trust account, not your personal checking. I'm giving you monthly statements. Trust me. The word trust was the key. He weaponized our history. I signed the papers that night. The first 6 months were glorious. Mark's monthly statements showed fantastic returns, 15%, then 18%. I was feeling like a genius. I bought Sarah a ridiculous engagement ring, and we started looking at houses far bigger than we ever dreamed of. Then the question started. We were at a Sunday dinner at my parents' house. My brother, David, who is a CPA, had been quiet through the whole evening, just watching me preen about Mark's latest investment in disruptive tech. Finally, David cleared his throat. Alex, I don't want to be that guy, but I looked up Mark's registration. He's listed, yeah, but as a sales associate at a tiny boutique firm. He's not a licensed fiduciary. He's not a registered investment advisor. The term private placement is often a red flag, and the returns you're quoting are unsustainable. You're just jealous, David. I snapped. It came out harsher than I intended, and the table went silent. I'm not jealous, David said, his voice level. I'm trying to save your life savings. Have you seen the underlying investments? Not the summary page, the actual prospectus. Mark handles all that complexity, I said dismissively. It's above my pay grade. And yours, apparently, since you stick to filing taxes. My father stepped in. Son, David has a point. You put all your eggs in one basket with a friend who has zero regulatory oversight for this kind of money. Just ask him for the detailed account balance from the clearing firm, not just his own PDF statement. I was furious. I felt attacked, and worse, I felt like they were attacking Mark. I stood up and slammed my napkin on the table. You know what? I'm done talking about this. I'm making more money than I ever have, and if you can't be supportive, then keep your opinions to yourselves. I left the dinner early. Sarah followed me out, but she wasn't on my side, either. Alex, they have a right to be concerned, she said as we drove home. Why are you so defensive? Because they don't trust me. They don't trust my judgment. I yelled. No, Alex, they don't trust him. And I don't either. He missed our engagement party because of a critical deal in Miami. The guy is flashier than the money he manages. Please, just listen to your brother. Have him look at the full documentation. No, I said, my jaw tight. I'm not going to insult Mark by showing his proprietary investment strategy to my skeptical, pencil-pushing brother. He said he'd double the money. Let him work. That was the last real argument Sarah and I had before the fall. I was so arrogant in my trust, so blinded by the easy money, that I literally drove away anyone who tried to warn me. About 9 months after I gave Mark the money, the statement stopped coming. I called Mark. No answer. I emailed. No reply. I called his office number, and it went straight to an automated message saying the number was disconnected. Panic began to prickle at the edge of my mind, but I still rationalized it. He's on a trip. He's in a deep negotiation. The firm moved offices. A week went by, then 2. Sarah looked at me with increasing concern every morning. Finally, she put her foot down. I don't care if you insult him, Alex. You are going to call the bank where that trust account was opened right now and get the current balance yourself. You don't have a choice. My heart hammered against my ribs as I drove to the local branch of the bank. I sat across from the branch manager, trying to sound calm as I explained I needed a statement for the Alex Peterson Investment Trust account. The manager pulled up the account, reviewed the documents I provided, and then her face went slack. Sir, I'm showing this account was opened 9 months ago. I see the large initial deposit. She paused, looking confused. And I see a series of large, rapid withdrawals, categorized as management fees and strategic transfers. The last transfer was 6 weeks ago. And the balance? I whispered, not wanting to hear the answer. She turned the screen toward me. The number was exactly $2,387.12. I stared at the screen, and the world seemed to tilt. The number I was supposed to have had 7 figures. This had 4. Where did the rest go? I asked, my voice cracking. The manager sighed and pushed a document across the desk. It was the original trust agreement I had signed. The beneficiary of the trust is you, Mr. Peterson. But the signatory, the individual with withdrawal rights, was Mr. Mark Jennings. He utilized the funds as allowed by the agreement, and then systematically liquidated the rest and closed the trust's affiliation with our bank. We flagged some large transfers, but because he had full signatory authority, we couldn't stop them without a legal injunction from you. He hadn't been investing, he'd been emptying it. The fancy statements were fabrications. The money was gone. I drove straight to Mark's house, an expensive place he'd bought a few months after I funded the trust. The lights were off, the mailbox overflowing. I hammered on the door until my knuckles bled. A neighbor came out and told me Mark and his wife had moved suddenly, about a month ago. Packed up a moving van in the middle of the night, real quick and quiet like, the neighbor said. The police investigation was a joke. It was a classic white-collar crime, and the officers informed me that since I had signed documents granting Mark full power over the trust, it was a civil matter, not a simple theft. It was fraudulent misrepresentation, but by the time a warrant was issued, Mark was long gone, probably overseas, enjoying the proceeds of my hard work and misplaced trust. I lost everything. I had to sell the new engagement ring. I stopped looking at houses. We moved out of our nice apartment and into a small, third-floor walk-up in a much less desirable neighborhood. The first few months were characterized by a crushing silence between Sarah and me, broken only by explosions of shame and anger. I should have listened to you. I should have listened to David. I screamed one night, kicking a cheap IKEA chair. Sarah didn't yell back. She just looked at me with weary, sad eyes. Mark did this, Alex. Not you. You were too trusting, yes, but he was a monster. We'll get through this. My humiliation was total. My brother lent me money to cover bills, saying nothing, just handing over a check. I had to go back to work, taking a low-level coding job for a company I hated. I was 33, broke, and back where I started, except now I was carrying the weight of being a failure, a sucker, a mark. But that failure hardened me. The shame gave me focus. I didn't try to get rich quick again. I worked the terrible coding job, I saved every penny, and I started a new side project, a small consulting business. That was all cash, all transparent, and all mine. I became obsessed with due diligence. I treated every handshake like a loaded gun. Sarah and I finally got married, a small, cheap ceremony, but it felt more honest than the mansion wedding we'd once planned. 5 years later, I had rebuilt. The consulting business had grown into a niche investment research firm. I taught myself the financial regulations, the certifications, and the due diligence that Mark had skipped. I made sure every contract I signed was ironclad. I was doing well, but more importantly, I was respected. One cold Tuesday afternoon, I was walking out of a high-rise office building in Manhattan, a building where I just closed a significant deal. I was wearing a well-tailored suit that wasn't flashy but commanded respect, and I carried a solid, heavy briefcase. My driver was pulling up to the curb when I spotted him. Mark. He was standing on the corner, shivering, wearing a cheap, threadbare overcoat that was far too thin for the weather. He was holding a crumpled paper cup, clearly begging. His hair was greasy, his face drawn, and his expensive teeth were dull. He looked 30 years older than he should have. He was looking down at his cup, so he didn't see me right away. I hesitated for a moment, a wave of cold, pure rage washing over me. But it quickly dissolved into something else. Pity. A vast, empty, hollow pity. He hadn't just stolen my money, he had destroyed himself, too, chasing a fraudulent high. He looked up then, and his eyes locked onto mine. The recognition was instantaneous. The blood drained from his face, leaving it the color of ash. He looked like a ghost who had just encountered his victim. I stopped about 10 feet from him. He tried to speak, but only a dry, rattling sound came out. Alex, he managed, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't answer. I just stood there, the man who had lost everything, now standing as the man who had rebuilt it all, looking down at the man who had tried to ruin him. He quickly looked down at his cup. Look, Alex, I was foolish. I made some terrible decisions. I lost everything, too. Please, man, I need help. I've been trying to get back on my feet. Foolish, I repeated, the word tasting like ash. You stole my life, Mark. You wiped me out. I know. But I'm here. I'm starting over. I'm desperate. I heard you made a comeback. Maybe you could help me get a job? Clean out your office? Anything? He looked utterly broken, the slick, arrogant financier completely gone, replaced by a desperate, ruined man. The irony was almost too heavy to bear. He was asking me, the man whose entire life he had destabilized, for a handout. I reached into my pocket. Mark's eyes followed my hand, his face alight with desperate, pathetic hope. Was I going to give him a second chance? Was I going to show the mercy he never showed me? I pulled out a small, crisp, $50 bill. I dropped it directly into his cup. This isn't for an apology, Mark. And it's not an investment, I said, my voice low and hard. It's charity. Don't ever call me again. I turned and walked to my waiting car. As I got in, I glanced back. Mark was staring at the $50, his face a mixture of relief and utter defeat. He was still standing on the same street corner, holding the same dirty cup, but this time, he wasn't looking at me as a friend, or as a Mark. He was looking at me as a customer, a successful man who had walked out of the ashes of his own greed. The roles were reversed, truly, and the only thing that felt real was the cold, quiet satisfaction of driving away. I didn't just rebuild my life. I built one that was untouchable by men like him. And that was the greatest victory of all.